S-P-E-A-K. Everybody wanna say, speak up. S-P-E-A-K. Speak up.
In this issue of Speak Up, Future Shock Special Reading, American Elections, Bush's Assets, London Busking, Now Legal, Beckham and the Globalization of Football, The World of Foosball, GMOs, The Monsanto Case, Brazil for Gringos, Amazing Pantanal, Life After SARS, a short story by Julian Barnes, and a song by Beyoncé. Hi, and welcome to issue 198 of Speak Up. We start on page 4.
Are you ready?
For what?
The big opportunity to transform all your talent into real profit is here. It is the time to have your own English school. Do you want to know how?
Sure.
Come and check Planet Idiomas and conquer your financial independence. Planet Compact Franchising is tailor-made for English teachers just like you. With little investment, you can have a quick and safe return. You want to know more?
Of course.
Take a look at our ad in the magazine, Planet Idiomas. Here you can conquer.
Future Shock.
A play on words. Language enthusiasts will definitely get a kick out of this site, www.wordspy.com, an encyclopedic tribute to the changing nature of language. Visitors to wordspy.com will discover the latest words to enter our language, and some with meanings that are unimaginable. Each word is then accompanied by an example citation that is followed by some background information. Did you know, for example, that Turon is a particularly unenlightened tourist? Tourist plus moron. If not, wordspy.com is worth a visit. Wearable vitamin C? Leave it to the Japanese to come up with this latest invention, the Vitamin Wear V-Up, a technology enabling one to absorb vitamin C just by wearing a certain fabric. Provitamin, a replacement for ordinary vitamin C, is embedded in a fiber, and when absorbed by the skin, changes into vitamin C. The effect remains for at least 30 washings. Vitamin C then protects the skin from sun damage and wrinkles. Fuji Spinning is awaiting a patent on this technology, which they hope to market on T-shirts by next year. A blinking ball. Golf fanatics will be happy to learn that they can now play their favorite sport even after sundown, thanks to a new product on the market, a golf ball that lights up in the dark. Twilight Tracer conforms to all the U.S. Golf Association standards with an added benefit. It blinks for 5 minutes, giving evening golfers the chance to follow the shot. One ball costs $13.95 and can be purchased at www.twilighttracer.com. Prepaid web cards now available. Parents of American children are now breathing a little easier thanks to the arrival of prepaid AT&T web cards for certain sites. Shockwave.com and a Disney game site are experimenting with this new form of payment for online purchases, satisfying parents who do not want to give credit card numbers to their children. Price from $9.99 to $29.99, these cards are available in at least 4,000 U.S. stores. Portable air purifier. With the SARS epidemic terrifying even the most frequent flyers, one gadget that has been on the market for several years is now enjoying an unexpected popularity. The Air Supply Mini-Mate, made by Wine Products of Los Angeles, is a battery-operated air purifier that supposedly kills 95% of airborne toxins. Worn around the user's neck, this device costs $145 and can be ordered from www.searchlightdental.com.
Speak up.
Exactly 1 year before the American presidential elections, George Walker Bush is on the campaign trail. The world's most powerful nation, the United States of America, is in the process of choosing a leader for the next 4-year presidential term. President George W. Bush has officially kicked off his re-election campaign, and seeing that Speak Up has been accused of being overcritical of Bush in the past, we decided to hand the microphone to two of his supporters, namely Greg Sidak, who is a member of an influential conservative think tank in Washington, D.C., the American Enterprise Institute, and his wife Melinda, a former lawyer and occasional columnist for The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and The Weekly Standard. Like many Americans of their political persuasion, they decided that their vacation destination this year would be anywhere but France. Accordingly, I caught up with them in Italy and asked them to explain the appeal of George Bush for Americans. Greg Sidak is the first to speak.
I think that Bush is seen as somebody like Ronald Reagan who is transparent in his values. What he believes comes through very clearly, almost to the point of sentimentality at times. And that's in contrast to Bill Clinton, in the eyes of many Americans, who was seen as always being very calculating and very composed in the way he presented himself publicly. So I think that there's a sense that Bush is a genuine person and is basically a good, virtuous person.
I think that in contrast to Clinton, who was seen as a very slick, almost fake personality whose opinions were predetermined by polling, Bush is doing what he genuinely feels. And even if you disagree with him, you feel like he's doing it for good motives and with sincerity. I do think he's had a radical reinterpretation of American foreign policy that is probably very unsettling and jarring to Europeans. It's unsettling to many Americans. But I think if you look at the results of our foreign policy for the past 20 or 30 years, you can't say that it was a success. I think he's finally the man who is throwing up his hands and saying we need a new direction. And certainly mistakes have been made, can be made in the future, but I don't think you could say that the continuation of the old policy was necessarily the way to go. And anytime you have change, it's different. Finally, I would say that Europeans just look at things fundamentally differently from Americans as far as war and peace. Europe has been torn apart by wars and the hardship of war for hundreds of years. They know firsthand what it's like. Americans, our experience of war has been relatively benign. We haven't been invaded. We've had the successful experiences in World War I and World War II of liberating countries and being greeted as heroes. We don't have an aversion where we think war is the worst possible outcome at any cost. We believe that sometimes the judicious use of force can be ultimately a force for liberalization and good in certain societies.
Do you feel there's a risk that the Iraqi occupation could become another Vietnam?
I am concerned about the current situation in Iraq. It appears that we perhaps didn't plan for it as well as we could have. The American army is much smaller than it once was, and it seems very overextended with all the various peacekeeping and other missions around the world, and it's not clear they have enough people on the ground or enough well-trained people on the ground to handle the sort of policing and rebuilding situation. Second, I would say that Americans are absolutely dreadful imperialists. We really don't know what we're doing. We're not very experienced. There are very few people in charge who were rebuilding Germany or Japan after World War II who are now involved. And it's not a good situation. We are kind of learning on the ground, and it's costing us seriously. So I feel concerns, and I think everybody in America feels concerns. And we don't like being on adventures abroad. We really don't, contrary to popular myth. We feel if we have to use force, we feel it's all right. On the other hand, we want to get it done quickly, get out, and get everybody home.
According to Michael Moore, at least, there are business links between the Bush and bin Laden families, and he is said to be preparing a film on this. What are your thoughts on the subject?
Maybe he could prove what he says. However, I guess my question is, so what about that? The fact is we have ample evidence from multiple sources that Saudi Arabian money has flooded the United States, that they have hired virtually every ex-senator and foreign policy expert from the State Department to be on their payroll, and they have sought in every way to influence the direction of business and politics in the United States. That's not news. I think it's of concern, and I think you would find that public policy intellectuals across the political spectrum are not happy about the situation, and that perhaps there need to be some changes in the future. And if Mr. Moore is going to expose those links and the deleterious effects that that has on foreign policy, I welcome it. More power to him.
Speak up.
From the United States, we head to the United Kingdom, and more specifically, the London Underground. Piers Grimley-Evans reports.
In recent weeks, some unusual sounds have been coming from a closed section of Canary Wharf Underground Station. In the space of an hour, the penetrating hum of an Australian didgeridoo is followed first by jazz saxophone and then by traditional songs accompanied by a dolon or African harp. London's international community of buskers is auditioning to take part in an ambitious new scheme. In collaboration with the brewer Carling, the Tube is, for the first time, officially welcoming musicians to its stations. Martin Penny, London Underground's Customer Programmes Implementation Manager, explains why.
This is a customer-driven initiative, and our customers have said for a long while, I think it's about 8 out of 10 of our customers have told us that they want good musicians as they travel around the underground. So that was the main motivation. The other thing is as well that we're actually improving the environment of the station, as well as developing relationships between the musicians and the staff, which has also been a bit fragile in the past. One of the things that we ended up with, because of our regime of chasing buskers out, was that a lot of the buskers that we had performing were sort of the bruisers rather than the good performers. And not saying that we didn't have good performers still performing illegally, but we certainly had vagrants with musical instruments performing on the system. And now we've addressed that, and as you can see today from the auditions, we're looking for quality musicians to perform on the system.
The performers at Canary Wharf are judged by London Underground staff and music industry professionals on their presentation, musical ability, originality and repertoire. If they make the grade, they will enter a rota of musicians who occupy special pitches across the underground system. At one of these, at the bottom of an escalator at Piccadilly Circus, I found a busker who has already passed the selection process and was happy to talk about why the Tube has such an appeal for musicians like him.
My name's Richard Stevenson, and I'm 40 years old, and I've been playing the guitar 30 years and busking 15 years. And out of the 15 years, I've been doing it 8 years professionally. It's my sole profession. I work 6 or 7 days a week, and most of the day as well. But I pay the bills and get by, and the money I earn from here, towards advertising and a CD and everything. Yes, and I get by and I enjoy it. Yeah, I enjoy it. The music I play is classical and easy listening, and I think the underground's the best place because the acoustics. And for example, if I'm playing outside in the street somewhere, which I often get moved, funnily enough, but the sound doesn't travel very far. But in the underground, it travels quite a distance all around the corridors and down the platforms, and it's nice. Yeah, it's nice, and it helps me as well. The sound travels further, so people are listening to it quite a few yards away before they actually see me. That's why it helps me, yeah. The advantage of playing in the underground is the weather. Outside, if it's cold or wet or rainy, you can't play. But in the underground, there's always people all day and all night, and you're under a roof, and it's quite warm and everything, so it's good.
And with the new scheme, he is even happier.
It's so much better because I can. Before, I used to get moved and booked by the police and then get fines, and I'm always looking over my shoulder before. But now, you can sit down for 4 hours or 6 hours a day, relax and enjoy it, and it's very nice, very good, and I hope it carries on as well. Yeah.
But whether this project continues largely depends on the public. According to some buskers, since the scheme started, travellers have become less generous. They now assume that the musicians they hear are being paid. Martin Penny asked me to point out that participants in his scheme are not paid, but are still dependent on your donations.
Speak up.
On the subject of soccer, we examine the Beckham phenomenon.
With this year's soccer season well underway, people the world over have been following the progress of David Beckham in his new life as a player with Real Madrid, which has also grabbed stars such as Zidane, Luis Figo, Roberto Carlos, and Ronaldo. The transfer of Beckham from Manchester United was a major media story during Europe's summer, and its coverage extended well beyond the sports pages. And for Financial Times journalist Simon Cooper, the Beckham phenomenon is indicative of the radical changes that are taking place in the modern game.
Cooper, who was born in the Netherlands, certainly knows his football, As a young writer, he travelled the world in order to study the sociology of soccer, particularly the game's effects on politics and culture. He went to Glasgow to examine the bitter hatred that divides Celtic's Catholic and Rangers Protestant fans, something that is also strongly felt in Northern Ireland. He headed to Italy to see how the amazing success of AC Milan, or Milan, in the early 1990s helped Silvio Berlusconi's political aspirations. And he also visited South America, Africa, and the former Soviet Union. The result was an informative book called Football Against the Enemy, which was published at the time of the 1994 World Cup. Earlier this year, Cooper published the more historical Ajax, the Dutch, the War, Football During the Second World War. He then proceeded to make the Beckham saga the subject of an article that appeared in the FT on July the 12th, entitled United They Stand, The Fans of Football. Cooper began by looking back to the year 1988, when David Beckham was a blonde 13-year-old dreaming of Manchester United and living in Essex. The football in those days, writes Cooper, was seldom very good, and English league matches were only televised in about 20 countries, while many Britons in towns like Stoke or Derby simply followed their local side. Fans chose a team and they supported it for life, and, according to Cooper, this devotion was best summed up by the cult book Fever Pitch, written by Nick Hornby. Hornby, writes Cooper, confessed to being an obsessive-compulsive who arranged his life around seeing every Arsenal home match. He would even duck out of attending close friends' weddings if there was a clash. Fever Pitch was published in 1992, but according to Cooper, that was the year the old world of the lifelong one-club football fan began to change. For a start, it was the year that the new Premier League was founded, replacing the old First Division. Sky Television bought the TV rights and eventually flogged them to 160 countries. Manchester United proceeded to win 8 championships in 11 years, and the stadium capacity at its home ground, Old Trafford, was increased from 36,000 to 67,000. Above all, writes Cooper, the club unearthed a global icon in the form of David Beckham. It is reckoned that 50 million fans now support Manchester United around the world, and many of them are unaware that Manchester is a city in England. Their attachment to the club is often weak. Cooper argues that it is the players who now attract the fans to a team. This is particularly true of Asia, where Beckham enjoys superstar status. The branding consultancy Future Brand, Cooper writes, estimates that 30% of non-European fans follow a team because of certain players. Some of these will follow Beckham to Real Madrid. Cooper argues that English fans are also becoming, as he puts it, promiscuous. He observes that supporting one's local side was fine in the days when it could possibly win something. But over the past 15 years, lots of money has entered football, and most of it has gone to the big clubs. Derby County or Nottingham Forest will never win a big prize again. That removes much of the point of supporting the hometown club. People's sense of local belonging is waning anyway. Witness the decline of local newspapers. According to a survey in the late 1990s, about half of all British children support Manchester United. In fact, many kids support more than one club at the same time. Cooper concludes that back in 1988, such promiscuity would have seemed absurd. Now, it is becoming the norm.
Speak up.
Next up, we take a look at the unusual world of table soccer.
In 1937, Alexander Finisterre was working as a carpenter in a hospital in northern Spain. Most of the hospital's patients were there as a result of the Civil War, and Alexander was saddened by the amount of children who had lost a leg and wouldn't be able to play football anymore. He put together a few bits of wood, carved 2 teams of players, and there you had it, table football, or footballin as it is known in its home country. The first league was established in 1950 in Belgium, and in 1976 the European Table Soccer Union was formed. Although it's difficult to imagine how you can have a union when the tables are different sizes, the figures have different shapes, none of the handles are the same design, and even the balls are made of a different material. Not only are the equipment and rules different everywhere you go, None of the names for the game are the same either. You've got Lagrit in Turkey, Babyfoot in France, Kaduragwel Shulchan in Israel, and a world encyclopedia of stupid names elsewhere around the globe, although foosball, the American name for the game, is becoming more widely used, with players being known as fussers. This loose approach to the rulebook also applies to the competitions, although, according to Kathy Brainard of the North American Table Soccer Association, the real championship, called the World Championship of Table Soccer, is played in Dallas on a US-made table and offers $130,000 in prize money. While British fussers might not be able to look forward to winning such large prizes, they still take the game seriously. Oxford University is one of the top table football venues in the country, and several players are known nationally. In the 5th Oxford Open Garlando Table Football Tournament, held in June this year, Ruth Eastwood beat all her female opponents, all 5 of them anyway, to win the women's event, ranking her 4th nationally. But how did a polite lady from Edinburgh become involved in the male-dominated, smoky pub atmosphere of table football?
I was never very athletic in school, and I joined the university and everyone had their football and their hockey and their tennis, and the best thing was to be in the pub with my friends, and I took up table football, and the atmosphere is incredible. It's very exciting. Always the friends of either team are heckling the other ones and trying to push the team to the maximum.
While a lot of shouting might go on, at least you don't have football table hooligans, although it has been known for sneaky opponents to jam the bars and grease the balls. Football, hockey and tennis have their tactics, but surely table football is just spinning a bar, hoping the little men will connect with the ball.
There is a lot of very tactical moves, and if you do just hit and spin the ball, it's actually against the rules to play in that way. I think the girls play in a more tactical way than the boys, because the boys tend to get very overheated with one another. The girls tend to pay more attention to the table. Generally, girls play just as good as the boys, and we give them a good run for their money.
So, having won the Women's Championship, is Ruth going to retire on her winnings?
As you know, in America, the prizes are much higher. But in Britain, the maximum's £300 for the whole championship, so the prizes are very, very small. Not many women play the game, and it's fantastic to be ranked 4th in Britain.
Speak up.
In order to help Brazil's transgenic debate, Speak Up brings a contribution from Canada. As Brazil has just started to flirt with genetically modified organisms, GMOs, some lessons could be learned from other countries before we commit the same mistakes. For example, a few Brazilians already know that planting GM seeds will oblige the farmers to pay royalties to the company that developed them, which in our case means the American-based transnational corporation Monsanto. But what about contamination? Yes, because plants have another way of reproducing themselves, that of pollination, which does not obey patent laws. This is the situation confronting a Canadian farmer, Percy Schmeiser, who has been accused and convicted of evading the royalty payments, but who alleges that he simply never bought the seeds. The ensuing legal battle between this 73-year-old farmer and giant chemical company Monsanto is emblematic of the anti-globalization movement and resembles the biblical David versus Goliath episode. But the weapons are now in the hands of the Canadian Supreme Court, after the Federal Court of Appeals ruled against the farmer. According to Schmeiser, there are in North America about 550 lawsuits by Monsanto against farmers, all waiting to see what happens with his case. Speak Up met Percy Schmeiser earlier this year and took part in a group interview. He was asked to briefly describe how contamination took place and how much was affected.
The contamination, I had scientists brought in from the University of Manitoba. Yeah. Some of my fields, there was no contamination. They couldn't find none. Okay. One or two fields had 1%, 2%, 8%, and in the ditch next to my neighbor who grew it, it was around 68%. Yeah, but that was in the ditch. But my neighbor had grown it in 1996, and they never told me. that he never told me he had grown it, and I didn't find out till the trial
Okay.
that he had grown. Then we knew where it came from. And then another neighbor, because my land lies along the main road to the canola, where they crush the canola, where they store it, and he said he was hauling canola with his truck, GMO canola, without a tarp on. And a lot of the canola blew off because it's a light seed. So we knew then where it came in that one field. But even having said that there was no contamination in some of the fields, the judge ruled that even the profit from those fields that had no contamination also goes to Monsanto. And he said the reason was because I was a seed developer and a seed saver, there was a probability. So even if there's a probability, there's some in a farmer's field, they can take your whole crop. It's ludicrous. It doesn't make sense, but that's what he ruled. Patent law is total supreme over farmers' rights. And not only that, a very important thing, but I didn't bring it out here today. He also ruled to use Monsanto's patent, you'd have to use their herbicide Roundup to spray in your crop. And the judge ruled that even though I never used Monsanto's patent, that didn't matter. It was immaterial. The fact that there was some plants in the ditch along my field, I was guilty. And it was Monsanto's. So in the patent law, it states use of patent. I never used a patent. The judge ruled everything in favor of Monsanto. So you asked me how I feel and what I would like to see, but I can't. And that's what the judge said in my case. I ought to or should have known that there was contamination in my seed because there was some growing in the ditch along my field.
Next, he explained why he thought this time he could win in court.
Well, the Supreme Court, I'll tell you why I have a very good chance now of winning it. Because in December, the Supreme Court came down with a decision on the Harvard mouse case. Have you heard about that?
No,
in North America?
No.
Harvard University in the U.S. put a gene into a mouse. And then they got a patent, and they did get the patent from, and they went all the way to the Supreme Court of the U.S. and said, yes, indeed, they invented the mouse, and they got a patent on it. Then Harvard came to Canada and said, we want a patent on that mouse in Canada. So the patent office refused it. Then the lower court, I should say the lower federal court, upheld that you couldn't patent it. Then Harvard went to the Federal Court of Appeal, and they overturned it and said, yes, you can patent a life form. Then there was such an outcry and uproar in Canada, it went to the Supreme Court. And the decision came down in December. You cannot patent a life-giving form in Canada. And they distinguish a higher life form and a lower life form. And a higher life form is a seed, plant, human being, anything. Lower life form is like a bacteria, like a yeast. So that was a major, major victory for me. Because in that Supreme Court decision, even though my case is before there right now, they did mention my case in that decision for the Harvard mouse. Because one of the judges says, well, you have already, one of the judges that was in favor of patenting, because the decision was 4-5, so it was close. And they said, well, you have already patented a life form in Canada in my case, you see. But the person that patented, the director of the patent office, took it on his own to patent it and interpret, because there was never no law in Canada saying that you could patent a life form. So that was a major development. See, because in Japan you can patent a life form, and United States and a few countries in Europe, I think. I don't know which one.
Mr. Schmeiser was questioned next whether Monsanto tried to reach a deal to settle the court battle.
They did after the trial, before it went to the appeal. They came to me and said they want $200,000. I have to pay all my lawyer fees of that time was around $150,000. But the worst of all, they wanted a gag order.
So what?
A gag. I could not say anything. You asked me something, sorry, I can't say nothing. See? And I said, no, I will never, ever keep my mouth shut. You cannot take my freedom of speech away. And in 30 seconds it was over. I will not have my freedom of speech taken away for a multi-billion company that is deceitful and corrupt.
Okay.
And they're the company that said PCBs were safe. They're the company that said Agent Orange was safe. They were the company that said DDT was safe. Should we believe them now when they say GMOs are safe?
Speak up.
As most tourists in the Pantanal are foreign, Speak Up went there to find out why. Speak Up met Don Eaton, co-director of the Conservation Research Initiative at Fazenda Rio Negro, and started by asking what exactly they were doing there.
Well, here we have a research center with 7 different projects which are studying the Pantanal, different aspects of the Pantanal. And I'm one of those researchers, and I'm also one of the people who coordinate the different projects. We work with Conservation International, who are our partners here, our conservation partners in the Pantanal, and Fazenda Rio Negro is actually a separate business, and we are sort of within their hospitality here. You know, we're guests at their farm. It's a great place to do research. But then we actually work for Earthwatch, which is an institution in the United States which supports research all over the world.
How many of you here?
There's, 7 different projects, and among those projects there must be about a dozen researchers.
And these projects are linked to any Brazilian university as well, or not necessarily?
They're linked with our partners, Conservation International of Brazil, who are very concerned about the conservation of the Pantanal. Okay, so that's our connection here in Brazil. They're our partners. They sort of set the goals for conservation, and we try to fit our research into those goals so that we help, so that they can be applied. So what we do here can be applied to actual conservation.
What kind of thing are you researching here?
We have there's a project studying the bird communities, what they call a bird community, which is just the groups of many species of birds which you have here in the different kinds of habitats. They found more than 400 species of birds just on the farm here. Have a project dealing with looking at wetlands, and there's many different kinds of wetlands and other types of freshwater habitats. Because here we have the Rio Negro, which is what they call a black water river, and there's a bunch of habitats associated with it. And then there's Bahias and Salinas. I'm not sure if you've toured those, but all these lakes north of the river, which are all quite different from each other. There's some which are saline, salty to a certain extent, and others which are freshwater. And so you get an amazing variety of things which live in them because of those differences, those chemical differences. So there's a project.
Are they salty by nature? Or
they're salty by nature. It's a real interesting thing that you find between the Rio Negro and the Rio Taquari north of here. And it's probably unique to this region of the Pantanal. There's no other place in the world like it in terms of having such a variety of different kinds of little lakes all pushed together like this.
And
other projects, we have a project looking at bats. There's like 25, 30 species of bats here. And it's also a study looking at where they're distributed, what species we have, what they eat. There's a study looking at giant otters and neotropical river otters, which are they're like top predators in the system. Giant otters, which
how are they called in Portuguese?
Ariranhas, which are a big hit with tourists, as I'm sure you can imagine. People love to see the giant otters, and they appear to be somewhat sensitive to tourism, in terms of mating success and that. And one of the things the researcher is trying to find out is if that's really true, or if there is some impact, because here it's fairly low impact tourism. And so she's going to look at the data here and compare it to other areas where it's higher impact. And then there's actually other projects, believe it or not. There's a project looking at peccaries, which here in Brazil you call queixadas and catetus, 2 native species of sort of pig-like animals. They're not pigs. And then there's here the introduced Monteiro, which is a feral pig, a wild pig, which was introduced about 200 years ago by ranchers.
Where from?
It's from Europe originally, from Asia. The pigs are more from the old world. And in the Americas, including North and South America, we just have peccaries. But pigs from the old world were introduced on both our continents. And now they're sort of a part of the ecology here in the Pantanal. So she's looking at the effects that the feral pigs have on the native peccaries and vice versa. And I'm forgetting a project on the jaguars and other predators of the region. We have a couple researchers trying to figure out the population of jaguar, which we have here, and puma, and other cats, and as well as crab-eating foxes and things like that, and studying their ecology.
How are they doing?
They seem to, in the Pantanal, they seem to do pretty well, at least in some areas where there's not a lot of hunting. But traditionally in the Pantanal, people would hunt the jaguar because they kill cattle. And so one of the things the study is trying to do is to promote a program where the landowners agree not to hunt, and in trade they receive, if there's a cattle killed, there's someone sent there who confirms the kill, if it really was a jaguar or not, and they're compensated either financially or through a health service that they're providing.
And farmers are getting paid.
Getting compensated, yep. The ones who've agreed to sign, they sign sort of an agreement. So it's rather than killing off our main predator, which is very important to the whole system because they keep numbers of peccaries down and deer and the rest of they're really important in the system. And a lot of places they've been eliminated, but the Pantanal is one place where there's still a lot of open habitat where jaguars seem to do well.
What are the biggest menaces to Pantanal?
Sure.
Nowadays.
One of the biggest is a proposal by Mercosul to channelize the upper Paraguay River for ocean-going barges, really huge barges. And this is something that's been shelved at the moment, but there's lots of, it's also something which is continually going on in sort of a small scale, somewhat out of the public's eye, where they'll still use big barges on the Paraguay River, and they destroy banks along the river and so forth. And the problem with channelizing or straightening the Paraguay River is that the Pantanal is a very, very flat place full of wetlands on the sides of the rivers, and if you deepen the channel and make it for ocean-going vessels, you'll change the water balance in the area. It'll be much, much faster, the flow of the water through the Pantanal, and what that causes is it drains a lot of the backwaters, the swamps, which contain most of the productivity of fish and so forth, which supports all this bird life and the caiman and the rest of it. The reason the Pantanal is so productive is because of the wetlands. It's just very, very productive environments.
And who would benefit with it?
The people who would benefit are soybean farmers, mostly in Brazil, and some mining companies as well. Right? Mining companies who would ship their things. The problem, I think, in Bolivia and Paraguay is they're landlocked. They don't have an ocean port. And rather than renovating their railroads, which would be a much more sensible, or even highways resolution, they want to channelize the Paraguay River so that everything can be shipped to Buenos Aires or some port to the ocean. But it would be just a disaster for the Pantanal. It's the kind of thing which has been shelved, but it keeps coming up. Both the governors of Mato Grosso and Mato Grosso do Sul support it, so it's something that's scary. One of the other things it has to do, also kind of from outside interests, outside the Pantanal, are the erosion and sedimentation caused by huge farming operations, mostly on the Brazilian Planalto, the plateau above the Pantanal, where there's, in the last, say, 50 years, there's been a major push to produce cotton and soybeans in that region. But the way it was done was that there was a lot of erosion caused in the process.
Deforestation.
Through deforestation, and nothing was left, for example, on the sides of rivers. If you want to save your soil for the long term, you need to leave forest and so forth along rivers, or else it all just goes into the channel, and all the good stuff, all the good part of the soil, ends up downstream, which in this case is the Pantanal. In some cases, like the Rio Taquari, the whole channel of the river has changed. A lot of cattle farms were inundated because of the areas which used to be good for grazing cattle are now totally underwater along the Rio Taquari. So that was a huge impact, yeah. So, and now they're kind of trying to go back and do remedial things, I think, looking at restoring forests along rivers and so forth, and trying to prevent it from happening like in the headwaters of the Rio Negro and other places. So that's a big problem.
A touchy issue for Brazilians concerns how international these NGOs are and how Brazilian they are.
That's a good question, yeah. Some of them, like CI, Conservation International, their main office is in Washington, D.C. However, there's a Conservation International of Brazil based in Brasilia, and it's very Brazilian. It's fairly independent of the mother NGO or whatever in the States. And some of the others are also, I think, have Brazilian affiliates. And then we're also associated with a Brazilian NGO, totally Brazilian NGO, called the Instituto de Biologia de Conservação, which has helped us buy equipment and some other things here. And that's totally Brazilian. And I'm sure there's some other smaller ones which I don't remember now.
And within Brazilian government, there is support for...
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The Embrapa in the Pantanal has a very strong program of research, both in ecology, conservation, and in looking at cattle, the best way to manage cattle and fire and that sort of those issues.
Is there something else peculiar about this region in the Pantanal?
Just one thing about this region, the Rio Negro region, is that because it's been well looked after for generations, the area is quite well preserved. And if you go out tomorrow or whenever on a drive in a Jeep or on the boat, you're going to see a lot of wildlife. And that's something kind of unique to the Pantanal because it's somewhat open, the area is open, and this whole thing about it being very productive. So you get lots of deer, you'll see marsh deer, all kinds of other peccaries all over the place, and if you were in maybe even Amazonia, you'd have a much more difficult time seeing them. It's not that they're there, it's just they're more difficult to see. But so this region is quite well preserved. So what we're trying to do here is use it as sort of a reference for comparisons to other areas in the Pantanal that are more disturbed. So we can take the data here and then use it for suggesting conservation measures in other parts where perhaps there's impacts either from deforestation or erosion or whatever the issue happens to be.
And what would be the next step?
The next step from here is to go to those disturbed areas, is to take the research and do very similar sorts of surveys and censuses and collecting baseline data and seeing what are the effects of fire and of cattle and of erosion and that kind of thing, so that we can make intelligent decisions for the future of the Pantanal. I mean, you need that basic data or you're sort of guessing, about what the next steps.
Speak Up then talked to two couples of English tourists and asked for their impressions. First, Carl Peggs and Julie Woodford.
It's fantastic. There's lots of wildlife, plenty to do. It's very hot. The scenery is beautiful, very beautiful.
Lots of insects.
How did you find out about the Rio Negro farm?
Well, I read about the Pantanal in guidebooks, and they mentioned the Rio Negro. And when I looked at English tour companies, it was one of the farms that they booked people to. So we booked through a company in England, and it booked to here.
And were you lucky in spotting animals?
Very lucky.
We've seen
We see armadillo, giant anteater with a baby on its back, and another giant anteater. We saw tapir. We've seen peccaries, white-lipped and collared.
feral pigs.
We've seen feral pigs. We've seen marsh deer and pampas deer. We saw a taira. We've seen near tropical river otters twice.
Piranhas.
We fished for, of course, capybara, caiman, and plenty of birds. We've seen the hyacinth macaws and green and red macaws.
Red macaws, yeah. And we've been horse riding and fishing. Yeah, this morning. It was good fun.
Very good.
Really good fun.
So you would recommend the place to your friends?
Definitely.
And it's, the whole idea that you're in the middle of nowhere. You're completely sort of away from city life. It's just very low key, very sort of slow pace, very relaxing.
The second British couple, Neil and Gil Raypert, was also asked to evaluate the place.
I think the evening on the boat going out to see the mostly birds and the caiman and watching the sunset. It's such a peaceful time of day. And then yesterday, instead of going on the motorboat, we went in the canoes. And it was a little bit more hard work, but it was almost better because it was more peaceful without the sound of the boat's engine.
So you came to see the deer,
The different kind of wildlife that you get in South America and in the Pantanal region in particular. Because we've traveled all over the world, we've been very lucky. So we've seen wildlife in India, Africa, Australia, but here it's different.
I was going to ask, comparing to other places, what is unique, what is different here?
Well, the animals to start with.
Obviously they are different. I think that is it. It's to see animals that we have never seen before, which you can only see not necessarily just in the Pantanal, but it's the one place where you're more likely to see them.
Than they are in the wild. You can go to zoos in most big cities, but it's best to see them as they are.
So your assessment is they are doing good work?
It would appear that they are trying, yes.
Not as much as they might, but that is controlled by money, I think.
In spite of being German, Philip Hearn has been working as a tour guide for almost a year at Fazenda Rio Negro. Speak Up asked why foreigners like himself were the majority among the tourists.
Yeah, that's definitely due to the price of, staying here a night or a couple of days. It's quite expensive. And so it's a lot of Americans, a lot of English, some Australians, Germans, French, and sometimes Portuguese. And that's all that I've been seeing here.
And what's their impression generally about Fazenda Rio Negro?
Well, they always go with, missing the fazenda, I think. Everyone liked it so far. That's my impression.
Yeah, the average stay is 3-4 days?
Yeah, 3, 4, or 5 days, maybe. Maximum 5 days. And then of the regular guests. But then there's also the volunteers from the Earthwatch program, but they stay 11, 12 days. They all like very much to see the wildlife here, tropical wildlife that we don't have in Europe or in the US. So.
And you, how did you fall in love with the Pantanal?
Well, that's actually a long story. In Germany there's a national service, a mandatory service that guys have to do after school. And we can do it either in the military or doing a social service. And we can do this social service abroad as well. And this was always what I wanted to do in the tropical areas. And my parents once came out to the Pantanal, as my father sometimes works in São Paulo. They were just having vacation holidays, and they went to Cayman. And then we took advantage of this, and they asked the staff members there if they would know of any project where I could work for a year for my social service, and then they gave them the address of the Rio Negro farm, and this way I got to know the
So you Pantanal. Came here as an alternative to military service.
Exactly, this is what I came out here for, and I definitely enjoyed it. It was a mandatory service for me, but it was definitely something that I would have done anyway, so didn't even feel like anything that I was obliged to do.
Any message you would like to leave for Brazilians about the Pantanal?
Yeah, keep on preserving areas like the Pantanal, Amazon.
Speak up.
If David Beckham represents the globalization of soccer, then perhaps the recent SARS scare represents the globalization of infectious diseases. Piers Grimley-Evans has more.
For most people in the West, the appearance of SARS, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, was a nasty surprise. But not for Professor Ron Behrens, an expert in infectious diseases at London School of Hygiene and Tropical Diseases. He says there was nothing surprising about it, nor, and this is the worrying bit, is it that nasty. If you are of a nervous disposition, stop reading now, because far, far worse is on its way.
The SARS epidemic was not unexpected, in that we were predicting new viruses and new diseases to emerge, and also new diseases to occur in different places. And so, in fact, the one disease that we're particularly preparing for is the flu pandemic, where we would expect a mutation to occur in the flu virus to develop to the type of flu that we saw in the 1918 outbreak, which was particularly virulent and killed a significant proportion of the world's population. And because we would predict that it was almost certainly going to occur again, a lot of organizations are preparing for that eventuality.
The main response from institutions like the World Health Organization to this threat is surveillance, structures to monitor unusual diseases as they appear. They are very sophisticated and they help the world respond to SARS. But although our health organizations are much more sophisticated than those of 1918, when influenza killed 70 million people, Professor Behrens is not optimistic about our ability to control a similar mutation today.
I think there's no doubt that there will be huge mortality, and it'll be much bigger than then, because of course in those days there wasn't air travel, so the virus actually spread very slowly by boat. So yes, I think we will see similar or higher mortality. It was very big, millions, and it was usually young people, healthy people, not just the elderly and the infirm. So I think that it is a very significant threat. Obviously, the people don't overplay it because it could cause great anxiety. But, I mean, there are many issues. For example, one, could we make enough vaccine for the world's population within a period of months, which is what would be necessary? If we had to, for example, produce a vaccine for every person in the world, 6 billion doses of vaccine within a few months to deal with a new flu epidemic, there's no potential possibility of that ever occurring at this point in time. The timescale is difficult to work out. But I think there's no doubt that flu will come, because it's just a matter of time, and whether it comes next year or next 10 years is difficult to predict. But I think there's no doubt that the question is, can we deal with it should it occur? And at the moment, I think that's unlikely to be the case.
So what can we do short of moving to an uninhabited island? Our best hope, in fact, in coping with an epidemic is dealing with it where it first occurs, at its point source. The problem is that diseases often appear, by mutation or by transferring from animals to man, in places like Central Africa or China, where there is no infrastructure to detect their arrival. It is important for all of us that this changes. But, as Professor Behrens also points out, air travel makes it almost impossible to stop a disease travelling. So there is another area where we need to keep careful watch on our politicians.
In many parts of the world, including this country, public health is really a sort of poor relative of the rest of medicine. And yet it's going to be the most important factor in control of any infectious outbreak or pandemic. It's a bit like your spare tire. You'll only know about it when you need it. And the point is, public health is the same sort of situation. I mean, it's useful now and it does have some benefit, but really its biggest value is it is the only tool we'll have in sort of novel and important outbreaks, and we really have to have a functioning service, and I think we must make sure we don't degrade it.
Speak up.
Our short story this month is based on a real episode. Justin Ratcliffe reads Union Blues by Julian Barnes.
In 1979, I went to work for the London Sunday Times. I had come from the New Statesman, small, fraternal, left-wing. The Sunday Times was large, internally competitive, and politically centrist. But since my job on the literary pages was the same, deputy in a department of 2, I didn't expect much to change. This was naive. The Statesman had been liberal to the point of impracticality. It once appointed a messenger who turned out to be agoraphobic, and staff spent many head-shaking weeks wondering why the internal mail was efficiently delivered, but the external staff didn't seem to be getting through. The Sunday Times, on the other hand, was soon to be bought by Rupert Murdoch. For a short while, things were quiet. Then, one day, I was sitting at my desk looking out of the window at our sister paper, the Daily Times, a blockish modern building with departments layered on top of one another. I noticed that one of these layers seemed strangely deserted. The potted plants still lined the windowsills, but no activity was going on in their shade. One entire department, telemarketing or something, had been Murdocked. Over the next few weeks, the plants wilted until new appointees arrived and threw them out. Before long, it was our turn. As a byproduct of a labour dispute with the printers, everyone else at the paper, all 1,400 of us, was informed that we were suspended. News International no longer recognised our contracts of employment. The journalists inquired upward and were told not to worry our little heads. "You'll be fine," they said. "Just carry on working as usual. In a while we'll issue new contracts on the same terms as the old ones." Then why this sacking? What was the point? Well, it was just that management wanted to sort out some other layer of hapless plant coddlers, and from a legal point of view it was convenient to fire everyone, while not necessarily meaning it. This was my first direct experience of corporate management techniques, and the one thing everyone on the paper knew was that Murdoch regarded journalists as expendable, indeed, more or less interchangeable. If one didn't like the job, another would. It was a chilly moment. Around this time, I heard a News International manager, testosterone in a suit, utter a phrase I have never forgotten. He was being asked about some especially brutal piece of management. How could the company possibly do, i.e., get away with, something like that? "You do it by doing it," he replied. Quite. The National Union of Journalists called a meeting of the Chapel, as a union branch is known in this trade. I went along expecting, well, the sort of movie scene in which craggy journos denounce wicked new bosses on grounds of highish principle. The main motion proposed sending a letter to Rupert Murdoch protesting at our mass suspension, which was a direct breach of the disputes procedure he had signed up to when he bought the paper. This reasonable stance began to crumble when someone pointed out that Murdoch was a pretty tough customer and might not like getting a letter of protest, especially one that demanded a reply by a certain date. Then someone else ingeniously proposed that we write a letter that didn't require an answer from Murdoch. This way, we wouldn't have to find out if our bat squeak of protest had offended the great man. The suggestion was seriously discussed for a while, and even formulated into these menacing words. The NUJ Chapel would like to remind Mr. Murdoch and News International that it is aware of its position. That seemed to cover it. Or were we, even so, being too bold? On further reflection, we saw the folly of such provocation, and instead resolved to do absolutely nothing for the time being. A while later, we were all reinstated, and everything carried on as before, except for an awareness of the fundamental contempt in which we, as employees, were held. 8 or 9 years passed, and long after I had left the paper, I was appearing at the Edinburgh Book Festival. After my event, a middle-aged blonde woman of an international svelteness, not typical of such locations, asked me to sign a book for her husband. I raised my obliging pen over the title page. His name's Rupert Murdoch. But he once sacked me. "Oh, I'm sure it was nothing personal," came the mollifying reply. True, it hadn't been. And in that moment, politeness mixing perhaps with the brief vanity of imagining that a novel might strike to the heart of a monster, my pen blabbed, "To Rupert Murdoch from Julian Barnes." It is the phrase I most regret having written.
Speak up.
And now we leave you crazy in love.
That's all for now, folks. See you again next month.